This is Liminal Credentials Podcast. My name is Kristen, and my guest today is Wright. Wright is a fourth-generation Reichian therapist. This means she was trained by 2 generations away from Wilhelm Reich himself. She was trained at the California Family Study Center, Reichian training program for professionals in Burbank, California. She was also trained by Henry Hill, an ergonomist who was trained by Ellsworth Baker. Dr. Baker was trained by Wilhelm Reich himself. She was academically educated in Philadelphia and here in Los Angeles. She is a trainer and has trained therapists here in Amsterdam, Denmark, San Francisco, and London, working with them and their client population, developing healing strategies. She was a member of an 18-therapist training program at the Santa Monica Therapy Center from 1973 to 1976. She is a university lecturer and has lectured at various universities and human potential growth centers here and in Europe. She is a certified transactional analyst. Primarily, the scope of her work includes opening deep, powerful emotions and the life of the body, life management, existential disenchantment, depression and loss, self-realization and identity crisis, addiction and substance abuse, marriage and relationshiping, human sexuality, post-traumatic stress syndrome, the creative process as it relates to acting, music, art, writing, etc. Reverend Wright, M.A., CRT, C.A., C.M., is an ordained minister with the Association for the Integration of the Whole Person, AIWP, and teaches cross-cultural anthropological spirituality. Fundamentally, she teaches people to know themselves and to know others. So welcome, Wright.
Hello.
Thank you for being here today.
It's my pleasure. Nice to see you, and nice to see you out there.
Awesome. Wonderful. So
I'm really going to enjoy this.
Good. Me too. So how is Reichian therapy different from other models of therapy?
Reichian therapy is a somatic-based body-mind therapy. The other therapies like Gestalt therapy or transactional analysis, Jungian, those therapies are more cognitively based. They don't directly involve the soma, the body, as well. And from our perspective as Reichians, we understand that the individual is a body as well as a mind, and that unless you involve the whole person, the therapy, the transformation that's being sought will not be accomplished. So Reichian therapy we have developed, and Dr. Wilhelm Reich is the creator of this. We have developed procedures and processes that directly involve the individual with their entire body. And so I'd like to say a little bit about Dr. Reich. His name really is Wilhelm Reich, but we're in America, so we have changed it to Wilhelm Reich. So I'll use the word Reich because that is mostly understood in our culture. Also, Dr. Reich never called his therapy Reichian therapy. He called it orgonomy. And so the term Reichian therapy or neo-Reichian therapy actually happened in the 70s when a great number of Reichian therapists were trained in the tradition of what Wilhelm Reich had created. Reich discovered something called orgone energy. He called it orgone energy. The Indians from India called it prana, the Chinese call it qi, Reichenbach called it animal magnetism, probably indigenous cultures the world over might call it spirit, but it's actually an energy that's in one's body, and it's also, without any of these people necessarily talking to each other, they all came up with the idea, the phenomenon, the discovery that we have this energy in our body, and it's also out there in the stratosphere, that there is a connection between the stratosphere and us. We are not disconnected, and this is a very important concept because everything really is connected to everything else. So Reich discovered this energy. It was there all along, but he found it himself, and As I said, the Indians discovered that the Chinese knew it was there. And he called his therapy orgonomy. So Reich himself was born in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And before he was even 14 years old, he had lost both his mother and his father. His mother to suicide, his father to tuberculosis. And he was inducted into the army very shortly after that. So Wright had like a very harsh kind of childhood, a very harsh teenagehood, and he's already a soldier. After that, Reich went to the Vienna Polytechnical Institute and studied with Dr. Sigmund Freud, and he became a psychoanalyst with Sigmund Freud. He opened an office down the street from Sigmund Freud, and he was practicing as a psychoanalyst. He was only about 21 years old. To us in the field, that's pretty amazing because no one is practicing in this country at 21 years old. But it was a fairly new approach, a new science, a new modality of therapy. So he somewhat got into all of this field in a very young age. However, as he began to practice, insanity was defined as something very different in those days. And in the 70s, we redefined what sanity was, and we defined what it could be and what it wasn't. But at the time that Reich was practicing, he was treating patients, and he noticed some of his patients were usually diagnosed as hysterical. So he did something rather radical for him. Usually the attempt in those days was primarily to calm people down, to get them to stop screaming, to stop crying, or stop acting out. And what Reich did is, for some reason, he got the idea, I'm just going to encourage them to do that. So what he discovered was, as a result of encouraging them to act out, to scream a lot, to cry, to allow their bodies to shudder, to shake, and so forth, something astonishing happened. They became better. So in discovering that is what created his theory and practice of orgonomy. And he noticed that what would bring this on the most would be that if he encouraged them, instead of shut your breathing down, don't cry, don't scream, don't move around, but rather breathe a lot, he was encouraging them to breathe a lot, and then this would be bringing on all these extreme emotional, what we call discharges. So the breath is everything involved in Reichian therapy, and the more we breathe, what Wright discovered was, the more the individual learns to breathe and does breathe more fully, something happens called a charge. We become charged, and it is observable. Anyone can observe it. So Reich, in his discovery and his quest to find out how does all this work, he discovered that breathing creates charging and that some kind of electrical increase happens in the body. So if you have a lot of charge, and if you're very charged, this means you're very alive. If you don't have any charge, what it means is you're
dead.
Exactly. So dead people do not carry a charge, but we alive people do. So if you observe babies are very charged. They have come in and they are very extremely intimate and close to nature and to our natural instincts and impulses. So you will notice that babies are moving a lot, they're breathing a lot. And he observed that there was a certain breathing cycle that happened, and we call it the Reichian breath cycle. So it's simply put, it's an inhale into the belly, pull up to the chest, exhale the belly, exhale the chest. You say, oh, how simple. Well, what happens in childhood in the socialization process to make children fit into whatever society they're born into, that this breathing pulsation gets interrupted. It gets changed into something else. So as Reich, we'll go back to specifically Reich sort of got himself into trouble. He was very much a free thinker. How could he not be? Since he was really, I think that Reich was PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome for sure, because of what happened with his parents. And then he was really an old child when he went to war as a soldier, you know. And here he is seeing people killed and probably had to do some killing himself. Well, we are not really made to do that. We're not supposed to kill other people. We are not, that's not our nature. So it's very unnatural. So Reich began looking very closely at, which we also did in the 70s, prevention. Rather than the child being destroyed or twisted or devastated or traumatized or any of these things as children, and then we have to create a therapy to fix them, and they get fixed, hopefully. So he began thinking a lot about prevention, which all great thinkers always think about, whoever you're talking to. I mean, the Dalai Lama thinks about prevention. Bertrand Russell, the great philosopher, thinks about Margaret Mead, the great anthropologist. All think about prevention. And so he became, very outspoken. He was a very outspoken chap, and so outspoken, in fact, the Vienna Psychoanalytic Institute really became very disgruntled with what he was saying. He was not really conforming to the role of being a psychoanalyst in their view. And then because he was a psychoanalyst practicing, forces in the communist and socialist section of that community didn't believe that one should be focusing their attention on therapy, but rather should be focusing all their attention on changing government, on recreating villages, on recreating the city, the family unit, all these things. He got in trouble with them. So he actually got in trouble with both of them, and they both kicked him out. So sometimes one can say, well, if you're being kicked out by a certain organization, you must be doing something right, because you're thinking for yourself. So Reich had a whole effort that he really promoted, which was the right to know, the right to be educated, to not be kept in ignorance and in poverty. So what Reich did was primarily, he made his way to the United States, and he eventually created a research institute in Maine, and he called it Organon, and he set up a research laboratory to further his studies about orgone energy. And he had very large, all kinds of equipment and so forth. And there are people that are, mostly really quite enthralled with Reich's scientific studies. As a young training Reichian therapist myself, I was very interested in all of that and really absorbed all that. And at some point, I was not so interested anymore, more interested in what is a human being and what makes a human being tick, and how is a human being put together, and how does a human being being hurt by society and rearranging them, and a population of people who came to see me to help them get back to being what they should have been. So in concluding Reich's story, Reich was very connected, very interested in sexuality and the function of the orgasm. And whenever anyone talks about Wilhelm Reich, they're often misleaded to think he was some sort of person only interested in sexuality. Well, of course he was not, but that is all part of us as human beings and what role it plays in being mentally healthy. What role does sexuality play in being healthy? So Wright did quite a lot of work on that. He wrote a number of books, Human Sexuality, Genital Character. All those books are not here, but all those sort of books. And he was rather outspoken about it, and he was an advocate of young people's sexuality and promoting and enabling a societal support system to enable them to keep their sexuality intact. So the more we call it, the more neurotic personalities didn't like that. They didn't like that at all. So anyone who is a pioneer in human sexuality usually is confronted with, that's Masters and Johnson and Sheer Height. Who was the other chap? Real famous one. And I forgot his name. But anyway, so...
Kinsey?
Yeah, Kinsley, thank you. So he attracted a lot of attention that way, and right along with that, he created something out of his scientific studies that would encase and encapture orgone energy. And he called it the orgone energy accumulator. So it's a box about this big. I used to have one at my institute. And you sit in the orgone energy accumulator and it increases your charge. And he did a lot of work on, does orgone energy stop cancer? And according to him and his studies, that fully charged cells, he called them bions, cannot support cancer cells. Well, this is like a great discovery. So the orgone energy accumulator, in fact, you and I are orgone energy accumulators. We are actually, you and me and our audience out there, are orgone energy accumulators. So the more you breathe, the more you accumulate orgone, the more charged you become, therefore you're an accumulator. So a lot of people don't look at it that way, but that's really what's going on. Well, he got into a little trouble with authorities regarding his views on human sexuality, and at some point, those were days when it was right after the Second World War. He fled Nazi Germany. He had a lot to say about the mass psychology of fascism and how does fascism occur. Fascism is a mental illness, and how does that happen? How do you take a little baby, a sweet, darling little innocent baby, and a few years later it's a goose-stepping Nazi? What happened? What happened? So that's a little bit on Wilhelm Reich. There are many books and films about Wilhelm Reich. Anyone who wants to pursue that, you can certainly familiarize yourself with this great, marvelous thinker.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
So now you have client confidentiality, but can you share with us some of your cases that you have treated in your 35,
Yes,
40
I can.
Your career?
Yes, of course. So I have been practicing now for about 35 years, and the whole issue about therapy is there's one major rule that governs therapy. When you become what you are instead of what you think you should be, growth and change occur. So Reichian therapy is all about, it's completely body-mind based, and the secret of therapy is all about becoming what you actually and really are. Okay. So what does that mean? Let's see, I had a gentleman come to me some time ago and wore a nice three-piece suit. He looked quite professional. In fact, he was an attorney. And he came He looked very distressed, very distraught, and he came and complained about being a major procrastinator. Mm-hmm. He was terrified that he couldn't get his papers filed in the court. And that's a very dangerous thing not to do, to not get your papers filed in the court. So what would kickstart as a result of that, he would have his secretaries, his all the other people in his office rushing around, hurrying up all of a sudden to get this done. And had heard me lecture somewhere and came in, and within 2 or 3 sessions during a Reichian therapy intensive, he was screaming that 2 of the men in his family were trying to kill him. So to look at this person walking in, he looks like he has everything completely under control. You would want to go to him as an attorney. If only you didn't know what was going on deeper, you would want to go to him. He is quite a very ethical person, a very kind person, very smart person. So he is actually what we call post-traumatic stress disorder. He's traumatized. So we go a little bit deeper in the deep story, which is he grew up in the projects. He was African American, and his mother died of an illegal abortion. Abortions were not medically safe in those days. It was before Roe v. Wade happened in 1974. His father remarried. His second marriage, they did not want him to be in the family. So one day, 2 of the men in the family, when he was in the cellar, put him on a swing that was down there, and they swung him harder and harder till he hit his head on the ceiling, and he came crashing down. He was screaming, and luckily his grandmother heard it and came down, and they took him to the hospital, and it was a very traumatic experience. So we're talking about somebody who's like early 60s. So he has lived his whole life with this trauma locked up inside of him. So through a series of treatment and intensives, finally got to the place where that was all worked out, everything that happened then. Emotionally, we say that if it's not worked out on an emotional level, it will never be worked out. So yes, of course, you can get some cognitive understanding of the traumas that have happened to you in the past. You can organize yourself better, but you will never be completely, thoroughly finished. So some people are having traumas at all different ages, and in our perspective, you are actually stuck there at that age. And you are having, as an individual, to face life and act like everyone else, and you're not. And this is a very traumatic experience for most people walking around. So Reichian therapy gives a real hope, a real opportunity to be able to change that and to correct that. Another client of mine, her family both her parents were ministers. They went to Iran, and she was 13 years old, and the political zeitgeist in Iran is women are not allowed to be walking around in the streets by themselves out there. And being young and feisty and 13 years old and wanting to hear the birds and see the sun, walked outside, and she was surrounded by several men who then passed her around, sexually molested her. She did get out of that with her life, but she carried all that with her for quite a number of years and found herself in the typing pool of USC and heard me give a lecture somewhere and came in for treatment, and all of that needed to be worked through. So that what she came out this end, and she actually moved to a mid western state, central United States, and she bought a homestead, and she became a poet laureate. She's a quite brilliant young woman, a poet laureate at one of the nearby universities. Had she not had this kind of therapy, she would have stayed in the typing pool, and who knows what would have happened. So what's going on inside these people? This is the cause often of addiction, because to control that much pain, that much existential disenchantment, you really need to use substances. So that's alcohol, that's drugs, that's any number of substances. So what happens, when people go through this treatment, they come in and they'll just announce, like, I don't want to drink anymore, or I've had 3 weeks already with no marijuana. In fact, because the human body doesn't really want all of that. The human psyche doesn't want any of that. The human psyche, the human being wants to be whole, and we are born whole. That's how we are born. So take another example. I treated several people who had been in Vietnam. So I have several people right now whose fathers were in Vietnam. Once again, human beings are not supposed to kill other people. And we could look at what causes war. That's another episode here. But some of these men, who went to Vietnam, and of course those that are over there, and he went to Iraq and so forth. Unfortunately, we have like 17 veterans a day committing suicide right now in the United States, because we're not supposed to be doing those things. So it is very much against our nature. Really, the basic concept of I'm okay, you're okay, I prosper you, you prosper me, this is what we're born feeling. If you look at children, how they interact with each other, that's really what they are all about. I prosper you, I give to you, you give to me. It's a back and forth. We are connected, we are supposed to be. So when you separate that out, all psychiatric conditions are caused by alienation from self, alienation from each other, and alienation from the planet. So if you become connected with yourself, you're not fully connected unless you can connect with others. And if you can connect with yourself and you can connect with others, you're still not fully connected. One has to connect also to nature. One has to be connected to the oceans, the rivers, the trees, the skies. This is really what human beings' natural condition is. So treating Vietnam vets that came back, many of them also were just turned into vegetables, and they stayed in institutions forever, And some of them were lucky enough to go to a Reichian therapist. Not that many people in the world, if you consider how many people there are in the world, ever got to go to a Reichian therapist. So there really weren't all that many trained in the 70s. So literally in Southern California, this is one of the best places to be if you are PTSD. So working with Vietnam vets, it's impossible to go through 20 or 30 Reichian therapy sessions and not be changed. There is no such thing. You will be changed. And the Reichian therapy workshop occurs the third Sunday of every month. It's been going on for, this particular workshop has been going on for about 10 years, continuously now. And there happens to be several children of Vietnam vets in that workshop who are dealing with the effects of fathers that, a couple of things happen when men come back from war. They turn into bullies, or they're completely destroyed, and they're called, the colloquial term, wimpy. either one or the other. They come back, they're barely functioning. And so their children never really get a connection with dad. And they never get the love, the connection, and so forth. So these are children of men who are PTSD, who went to war in Vietnam. Of course, this happened in Iraq. So going through, practicing, as you look at case after case, it all has to do with, once again, that theoretical, when you become what you are instead of what you think you should be, growth and change occur. I have also treated quite a lot of people who are the children of women and men in the Holocaust. It's another group of people right there, I'm not old enough to have treated anybody that was in the Holocaust, but they're children, So growing up with mom and dad who were in Auschwitz and Dachau, that didn't give you the greatest of all encouragement or good beginnings. Right. Also, at the same time, because Reichian therapy does enable you to become, let's say you're not PTSD, you're just run-of-the-mill neurotic, right? Mm-hmm. There are a lot of us around like that, right? We're just like that, right? Okay. So it's also enables you to freshen yourself. Reichian therapy enables you to freshen yourself. There's one, trip on the freeway and you feel angry, don't you?
Sometimes.
Yes, right, exactly. Yeah. So emotions are not something that we just do and then we leave, right? Really opening your emotions and getting an emotional connection with yourself is something one needs to do all your entire life. Mm-hmm. So this treatment program enables you actually to give your own self, your own therapy, Reichian therapy sessions. That's very important. Mm-hmm. So Maslow came along, and he was a psychologist who created self-actualization. He called it self-actualization, and a psychology of well-being and self-actualization. So I had a client that was sent to me by a chiropractor, and he came in and he said, my chiropractor said she can't do anything more from me, then you need to go see a Reichian therapist. Well, his back would literally go out on him, and he was always going to the chiropractor. And he was really quite well known, but he was losing his position as a well-known artist because he had no new material. He had no new material because he really, frankly, just dried up. That's what happened. Okay. So after a series of Reichian therapy intensives, he came in, he began saying, you know what, I just started writing some new songs. He said, I don't know where this is coming from. I've never done this before. I've never had this perspective. Mm-hmm. So what we're observing here is, if you do the same thing over and over and over again, you're going to dry up. So the human being needs to be inspired. A human being, you look very different right now, by the way. You look like you're being impacted by this talk. Look on your face. Look at her face. So, these are powerful stories,
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So it means that we now have the human engineering. We know how people are put together. We know how human beings need to begin a relationship with themselves, with their emotions. That if you don't do that, you're going to be what we call really stuck. You're going to be blocked. You're going to be procrastinate. You're going to use supplicants like sugar and drugs and this and that and the other. You're going to use all those things. Right. And that we know that a human being is really a pulsating individual. Mm-hmm. And everything pulsates in the universe, everything. Mm-hmm. In fact, the literal giving birth is a pulsation of the uterus. The ejaculation is a pulsation. Anything, all the neutrons and the bions, they're all pulsating. Everything is pulsating. So if you stop that pulsation, you get what we call stasis. You stopped. So my rock star, he was stopped. And so he could no longer create. So voila, bring in the creative process. So when one goes through Reichian therapy, you become more creative. You can paint better, you can create songs, you can play your music, you can create great recipes for wonderful foods and cakes and so forth. You can, you're suddenly something that's not wrapped in cotton and habituated and kind of dead and just stare at the TV or any of those kinds of things. Yeah. You're actually, things just pop out of you. Oh, I just wrote a poem. I didn't even know where it came from, you know. Yeah, I was working on my music and I came up with some great lyrics. I never even thought of it. Or, yeah, I really don't like my life. You know, I really need to change it. What can I do? You know, my life is wonderful and great for a long time, but you know, really now it's just not all that great. What can I do? I need to open my emotions. I need to get connected with myself, you know.
Is Reichian therapy for everyone, or are there situations where, you know, it would not be recommended?
Yes, contraindicated, we call it. Yeah, I don't think that Reichian therapy straight away is for everyone. This is exactly why I trained in transactional analysis. And there's a very good book out here by Claude Steiner, Scripts People Live, and Transactional Analysis Today. Claude Steiner was a first student, and I was trained, went also through some of that training. And transactional analysis is a cognitive approach. It is primarily the sine qua non of understanding relationships between people, like, and what are the dynamics going on between people. Reichian therapy doesn't do that. It's really totally body-based. It's working through armoring. We call it armoring and opening emotions. And whenever you do that, you have quite an experience of yourself, and you become yourself more. And the more you become yourself, the more you trust yourself. That's what leads to mental health. So transactional analysis, Eric Berne was the creator of transactional analysis, and it is a really quite, it's very underestimated these days. It used to be quite acknowledged in the 70s, but in the last 10, 15 years, it's very under-acknowledged. And I've had so many people say to me, I didn't realize it was that, you know, that advanced or that complete, or, you know, that useful. So in transactional analysis, Eric Berne said that there, Freudian analysis, there's id, superid, and ego. And Eric Berne said, well, because we are reared in nuclear families, mom, dad, etc., I think what develops in us is parent, adult, and child ego states. So he says that when we were born, we have all those three ego states, and we're born okay. I'm okay, right? I'm okay, you're okay. Mm-hmm. Well, that sounds ridiculous in a way, kind of pop psychology, but it really is another way of just saying the way many of the spiritual teachers tell us, you know, whether it's Native American teachers like Black Elk or Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh or whoever, Muktananda or whoever it could be. I'm okay, you're okay. So the child is born, feels okay about herself, his self, but is born into a family with neurotic parents, or maybe even worse, right? So let's picture the number line. Here's a number line. You know what that is, right? Okay, so it's 0 minus 1, 2, 3, 4, plus minus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if you're born into a 5 family, this is a family that's basically a middle class family. We talk about the United States of America because that's where we are. I'm not going to talk about German lifestyle or or Dutch or so forth. Although there's similarities over there. So you're born into a +5 family. There are some basic rules there. You know, you do all the chores we want you to do, and then you get your allowance. You know, you're at the dinner table. Don't talk with your mouth open. You know, as far as sexuality is concerned, we at least want you to be going steady. You know, so you know, hopefully you'll get married. You know, they have some basic rules. Okay, so the child is given a script. We call it a life script, and early on, and you can even get your script or know what your script is even before you're born. You can hear it, you can feel it. Okay, so it's like, do be nice, don't be a bad girl, you know, do this and that and the other, and you'll be a good girl, and you'll get everything you need. And if you're a bad boy, you'll be punished, etc. But it's pretty reasonable, you know. So you'll grow up with what we call a banal script. It's not going to lead to madness. It's not going to lead to insanity. It's not going to lead to suicide. It won't. On the other hand, if you're born into a -4 family, mommy or daddy calls you and says, I want you to go down to the store. I want you to buy a loaf of white bread and a Clark bar and a Baby Ruth. Here is the money. It's going to take you this long to get there and back, and you better do what I tell you to do. Okay. The child is very frightened. The child already knows how this parent is, goes down there. There are no Clark bars. So this puts the child into an existential crisis. The child, shall I just get 2 loaves of bread? Shall I go back with 1 candy only? Shall I go back with 2 candy bars of the same kind? This is a traumatic experience for this child. Child decides to take 2 Clark bars and goes back, opens the door. Mommy or daddy sees them, and mommy and daddy says, you stupid idiot, get over here. Takes their hand by the hands, turns on the stove and puts their hands in the burner. Okay. Or those of us who have studied child abuse, there is no scarcity of such. Right. So this child is going to be traumatized, aren't they?
Yes.
That's almost impossible to handle, isn't it?
Right.
Because not only is there, you're bad, you're no good, we don't care about you, but it's accentuated with pain, physical pain. So this child has been given a script. We call it "Don't be alive." Don't be alive. Right. Okay. So a person comes into therapy. They have this trauma going on in them. They're not really a candidate for Reichian therapy yet. So depending, on my opinion and colleagues, as we collaborate on anything, it may take, a year for transactional analysis work with some maybe light Reichian therapy in there. Some introduction to body therapy type of works. And I might do something like, I have had clients that they were so traumatized, they really could hardly even get into the front door. And I'll make appointments with them and they'll sit outside in the chair. And they may do that for several weeks. And I'll go out, I'll talk to them a little bit, and they just sit there. Okay? And then the next step would be they'll come into the waiting room, they'll sit there. And they'll see other people going back and forth. Then the next one, they actually come into the consulting office. So it's really timing, it's really patience. And some people come in and they are very ready for Reichian therapy. And at the same point, at the same time, they want to go as fast as possible because they've been suffering. They want to get rid of their suffering. And it's up to me to decide, can't go that fast. Because you cannot integrate what will come out of that session. So we're going to do some cognitive therapy, and then you'll have a Reichian intensive maybe 6 weeks from now. You'll have one every 6 weeks. How's that? And they really begin to understand the wisdom of that. So, and like my rock star person, he was able to just go right into Reichian therapy immediately. I have a program here where some of my clients come from other states or other countries. You can come in and you stay at a nearby place and you have a Reichian intensive once or twice a day for 1 week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. And then they fly out and they go back to their country or so forth. So that's a very intensive program. Those people, I usually have a consultation with them on the phone first or via the internet to see exactly what's going on with them. I'm not willing to take people in for Reichian therapy as quickly as they would like if I don't think it's indicated. What happens in the child is, let's talk about the child that's been traumatized like that. What happens is there is a split in the PAC, parent, adult, child. Okay, there's been a split in the parent ego state, and it splits off from being a nurturing parent into a critical parent. Okay, the critical parent can be even worse than just a critical parent. Okay, and this often happens with people who have been submitted to a very really monstrous parent and their real authentic parent, and they internalize it. They internalize that. And amazingly, human beings, for those of us who have watched human beings for years on end, this great question, what makes some human beings, even though they are brutalized, cling on to their own compassionate humanity? And what makes human beings turn into sociopaths? A sociopath is someone who has no feelings for anyone. They are the murderous group. They're a Jeffrey Dahmer, they're a Ted Bundy, there are, and so forth. What causes that? What caused that? So we're going to look at it all the time. People like me, we're always looking. Right? Bertrand Russell, Margaret Mead. Well, look. What happened? What's in there? And we think we're going to figure it out. We hope so. Anyway, some of us have. I think we have figured it out. So one of the challenges of therapy, of course, is to expose what the critical parent is and to dissolve it and turn it back into a nurturing parent. That is one of the goals, to strengthen the nurturing parent ego state again, so that the person turns out being what they were born. It's an arc all the way back to what they were born. Here is humanity. Here is a new baby that has been born. The baby is complete. The baby is a whole human being. And that is the point of what Reichian work does. And of course, all these people are seeking to get back to what they were in the beginning. Somewhere in their memory, they remember they must have once felt like a whole person. So transactional analysis deals with such things as making therapeutic contracts, what I want to work on while I'm in therapy. It does things like homework that you sign yourself, but I'll sign some and you agree to it. And sometimes it's if you are ready to go into a group, you get quite a lot of each workshop. There is a mini lecture on what the human transformation process is, and you learn how to speak from your ego states. Like if I were to ask you, what is your child saying right now, Kristen? What is your child saying right now?
I guess my child's in a pretty good mood. My child's like enjoying this conversation.
Okay.
Feels relaxed, so yeah.
All right. And what is your adult saying? Your adult ego state?
I guess, the adult feels like pretty relaxed, but also maybe a little bit more vigilant, like kind of maybe a little bit more nervous, slightly.
Really? Nervous? Your adult's nervous? So your adult ego state takes in information.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So let me clarify. I don't think I clarified that for you and for our viewers. In the child ego state, that's feelings, emotions, and creativity. That's what's in the child. Feelings, emotions, and creativity. Okay. So if you're sitting there, I feel angry, I feel hurt, I feel upset. What ego state is that?
It's the child.
That's the child, right? Or I feel pleasure, I feel happy, I really feel good. I want you to feel good. I want everybody to feel good. That's the child, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah, that's the child. In the adult ego state, when you're little, it's called a little professor. It's the one that takes in information and problem solves. It has no emotions whatsoever in it. Okay, so here's a very explicit example of a person that's a little adult. It's called a little professor, right? I have a headache, Mommy. Well, okay, here's a baby aspirin. And then you say, well, how does it know to go to my brain? And so I explain to you, how does it know to go to my ouchie when my head hurts, right? So then I explain, well, there's something called a river, and it goes all through your body. And it's red, and it carries the pill all through your body. It finds the place that hurts, and then it fixes it. That's the little professor. When you grow up, it's a full-blown adult at that point. It's the one that's like, oh, where's that meteor going? Or an Albert Einstein. What is the formula for an atomic bomb? Yeah, okay. Or Lisa Meitner, who did all the theoretical work on the atomic bomb. She's the one that did all the she's in her adult. But the adult really can't do anything creative without the child. It's way too dry. It's like A plus B equals B plus A. Right? It's that's no creativity. That comes from the child. Creativity, sexuality, and emotions. So the parent ego state is the one that it's always with us, in us, is of us. And I might say something, well, you know what, I think I want to go over and I want to skateboard over there. A nurturing parent might say, I don't think you should do that because you hurt your ankle the other day, you should rest. That's a nurturing parent. Or the nurturing parent's going to say something like, your child says, I don't really like this relationship with my boss. And the nurturing parent might say, well, I hear that, that's good, but you need to save up more money before you give your resignation. So the nurturing parent nurtures, it uses the information from the adult, all of them working together, voila, is the whole person. That's the whole person. So Reichian therapy really focuses quite a lot on the emotions, the body, on the armoring, and so forth. Transactional analysis teaches the individual how to understand which of their ego states are, we call it in the executive. If I say to you, you're bad, you're not okay, you're no good, can you tell me which ego state is in the executive?
That sounds like critical parent.
Right. It's a critical parent. So if you have a client, like I did, for instance, whose father used to take her to Pacific Palisades Park and grab her by the thumbs and hang her over PC Highway and tell her, I'm just doing this for your own good, you're a bad girl. And if you're good, I won't drop you. That's definitely, it's more than critical parent, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah. So we know that in Esalen, which is the great psychological institute up in Big Sur, in the early 70s, along with that big, renaissance that happened in this country, a group of people got together and they wrote the rights of the child. There's a 10-point rights of the child. So what Dr. Wright talked about this all the time. Society, the world will not change until we fully acknowledge and take care of the rights of children. Okay, that's a big order, because you look at the world out there right now, and it's really a problem.
Right.
So transactional analysis enables the individual to work in a cognitive way and understanding yourself. Also part of that is a 3-hour session, which we actually give you a lot of questions about your background, about your family life, and we come up with what's called your script, the life script. So, a life script is there's certain injunctions and attributions. And let's take one. Don't be close. Have a family where the parents are not close. They keep to themselves. They have no friends. They don't let you have any friends. Well, that's definitely a script that says don't be close, isn't it?
Right.
So when we analyze the material and it says don't be close, then you come in and you say, I don't have any friends, I'm really lonely, I do marijuana all the time, I'm overweight, I don't know what's wrong with me. And if I do your script, 3 hours of questioning, I'll be able to tell that you have a major don't be close script.
Mm.
Some scripts are homartic. You know what that means?
No.
Okay. It means it's a tragedy script. You're going to end up either insane severely, or suicidal, or severely addicted to a drug or something like that. Or you have a banal script. Well, you just have a pretty good life. You sort of truck along there, you just have a job that pays your rent, but maybe, not too happy, and you probably have a reasonable relationship, but, you're kind of bored most of the time, and the seasons will come and go, and, you'll be okay. Okay. Well, that's not very good if you're an artist, is it?
No.
Right. Because the artist has a roar going on inside of her or him that wants to be answered, wants to be acted out.
Right.
Artists, they want to create. The muses are sitting all on their backs, telling them paint the picture, write the poem, make the film. and if you have a banal script, that's going to cause problems.
Right.
So demystifying what the script is, usually banal scripts also say don't be creative. That's usually involved in there too. Don't rock the boat. Don't do anything unusual. That's exactly what the person needs to do, isn't it? Rock the boat, do something unusual. And it takes courage to do that. So courage. We need courage to have our life. Life is a big job, isn't it?
Yes.
It's a big job.
Yeah. Are there any, popular misconceptions about Reichian therapy that you hear often, or what do you think people possibly get wrong about Reichian therapy?
Yeah, there is, of course. In the 50s, it was also a time in the McCarthy era, and there was really the end of the war, and there was a certain kind of an insanity that happened in this country. And there were the myths that got started that Wilhelm Reich had people in the orgone energy accumulators having some kind of sexual activity. That was not at all. That was not happening at all. It's ridiculous, But, that kind of thing spreads, it sells newspapers.
Right.
It's sensational, people like to think things like that, And it really, frankly, is their own feelings that they have about their own sexuality or lack thereof, their own unhealthy sexuality, or their unfulfilled sexuality, their own mystification about sexuality, all of the above. It's kind of like the same thing that, a lot of people go into indigenous cultures all over the world and they condemn them for their sexual practices, Wright talked a lot about sexuality. He wrote several books about it. He talked about what is, the genital personality. Just simply put, what is genital personality? Well, it is the person that chooses life instead of death, chooses pleasure instead of painfulness, chooses let's go for a hike up the mountains. Okay. Right. Let's go for a hike up the mountain. No, I don't want to. It's as simple as that. That's really what it is. So they took that about Reich and the unsane people. They took it and they exacerbated it. There are some really ridiculous films out there. I can't believe some of the films I see, But they just focused on that. you notice I'm not focusing on it.
Yeah.
It's part of human experience. It is not the focused.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So spirituality, what
Yeah.
role does spirituality have in a really good potential growth program?
Mm-hmm.
We are spiritual beings. That's my position on that. And it is also the position of, Australian Aborigines, Native Americans, Sanoy Indian in Malaysia, the Inuit in Alaska, in other words, indigenous cultures the world over, that we are spiritual beings. That unless there is some spirituality in your life, that your life is incomplete and you are incomplete. Mm-hmm. So the association with the integration of the whole person happened in the 80s, and it's a California charter, and we have about 2,000 ministers, and spirituality is really what can carry you through in your life and when you're in a human potential growth program such as this. Mm-hmm. Because when you have to face some of the things about yourself and about what has happened to you, it's our spirituality that will take us through. It's our spirituality that will take us through. So spirituality is simple things that we need to learn, like all for one and one for all. That's spiritual. Cheap thrills are expensive. It's practical, but it's also spiritual, isn't it? The I of me is you. That's spiritual, isn't it? Which means you and I are connected. So the very disconnected society is the one that is more neurotic. In some culture, you just go there and they start calling you auntie or cousin immediately, right away. That they just think that you are. That's it. Our European culture is not like that. Our white Europe, it's not like that. Actually, African Americans, they will often call each other sister and this and that. There's a recognized acknowledgement. So spirituality is learning how to become a spiritual warrior. That you really need to be a spiritual warrior if you're going to take something on called yourself, because you are a complete and total universe, and learning what it means to be a human being. One of my clients said that you taught me what a human being is. What is a human being? And it's not what we see on TV. It's not what we see in the movies. It's when you experience yourself, and when you're given the wherewithal to experience yourself. So in order to do that, I get an example of people who have lived through the concentration camps through their parents. They weren't even there themselves. Mm-hmm. They need spirituality to strengthen themselves. And so spirituality is entirely necessary. And it teaches you, how do I deal with a bully? Well, a spiritual approach is win the war without ever fighting. That's a spiritual approach. Okay. And so you'll notice if you've ever been to my office, that I have a bulletin board and there's always spiritual proverbs up there. Mm-hmm. A really nice one from the Tahitians is, either you eat life or life eat you. Mm-hmm. So it means you just can't sit around and think you're going to do life, because life is going to do you. Mm-hmm. It's an active participation. That's a very spiritual interpretation. Yeah.
Okay. Dr. Reich has an existential statement that is in many of his books about love and work. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Love, work, and knowledge.
Love, work, and knowledge, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, love is, simply put, very important for us. We have to have love. You would think that was a given, but it's not. I recently had a client of mine, out of an intensive, I want love. Well, there's no love in his life. There never was any love in his life. And as a child, he had an abusive mother and a very distant father. There's no love. And it set him on a path of no love. So he was a human being in Reichian therapy. That's amazing.
Right.
In fact, I am the third Reichian therapist he's come to.
Wow.
The two others were Israel Rigardi, he's passed away, and Jack Willis. Both of them were chiropractors. There were a lot of chiropractors that were trained as ergonomists.
Oh, wow.
So, I mean, this poor fellow hasn't any love in his life. And he will never be whole until he gets love, until he creates. And he has to learn how to love. Is he just being selfish and, stingy? No. Well, it looks that way from the outside. He just doesn't know how. He's never had it. He's never felt it. So he has to literally learn. And he sees that in the workshop. He sees people being loving towards each other. And so he sees it and he's given permission just by the fact that they're in there and they're loving. Knowledge, we have to have knowledge. You're here right now. You're here seeking knowledge. This is your work. You invited me, you asked me to come and speak with you about Reichian therapy. You're seeking knowledge.
Right.
So as a result, you walk out of here much more knowledgeable. And you'll walk out with a lot more knowledge about what human beings are, what is possible, what's possible for you, what's possible for you and your family. So that's knowledge. We need to have knowledge. We are very smart. We have big brains up here. We have a brain here. We have a brain down there. Our whole body is a brain. We're all brain. We're really smart. Human beings are smart. If only they had a chance. Okay. So work, you have to have some kind of meaningful work. You can't do work that's just humdrum and, degrading and, without intelligence. Because work is, we need to do, whether that's, growing vegetables, it's meaningful, working with the earth, or whether that's being a therapist, or whether that's being an architect. And my last name is Wright. I'm associated with the Wrights, who were architects, way over there, and he created all these, structures and so forth. Yeah. Meaningful work is important, that we get something from our work, that we get nourished, we get enlivened, we get love, we get knowledge. All three has to happen. And so these three things need to rule our life. That's what Dr. Wright meant.
Okay, great.
All right. Well, thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, thank you. And
it's been very enjoyable.
Yes, I've enjoyed it as well. If people would like to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to reach out?
They can reach me at 310-450-3396.
Okay.
310-450-3396. And I am in Los Angeles, California.
And do you have a presence on the web at all, or would you prefer a phone call?
I do. It's being upgraded. You can go look at it. It needs work. I have somebody that's working on it right now, but it's rightbodymindtherapy.com.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk about Reichian therapy and your experiences as a Reichian therapist, and I've really enjoyed this, so thank you so much for being here today.
Well, you're welcome. I enjoyed working with you too, and I like your style in interviewing, and I hope that we can do it again sometime.
Okay, great. I hope so too.
All right. Good night, Kristen Phillips.
Good night, Wright. And we'll see you next time.